Yo, what's going on, dudes? Hopefully everyone is doing okay, so welcome back to the channel. So we're going to be talking about motorways today. How you get on them, how you ride on them, how you get off them, all that sort of stuff. And we'll also go over a wee bit of differences between dual carriageways and motorways. So motorways are definitely one of those things that you're going to ride on at some point in your riding life. They're quicker routes to go up and down the country. Obviously, you know, as bikers we like to go on twisty B roads sometimes, but you know, if you're in a bit of a hurry and you need to get somewhere, motorways are the way to go. But there can be a little bit of confusion, especially for not only learner riders but learner car drivers, between dual carriageways and motorways. So I'm not going to be going too deep into the theory of that just now, purely because dual carriageways, you should really be going over that in your Mod 2 training, and you'll also go over all the theory of it while you're studying for your theory test. So we'll go over some of the basic differences, just so you know, just so you've got a basic understanding of it. But there is a couple of key differences. They have a lot of similarities as well, and that the key differences is what we're going to go over just very briefly. Motorway has a key word in its name, motor. Alright, everything that's on a motorway has to be motorised, whereas a dual carriageway, you can go on it with a push bike, you even see people walking along them, but whereas motorways, you can't do that. Tractors are not allowed to travel on motorways either. Tractors and certain slow vehicles, just because, you know, the top speed is really low, so they're not allowed on motorways. And one of the absolute key things you need to know about a motorway is if you're learning to ride, learning to drive, you're not allowed on a motorway. You're allowed on a dual carriageway, single carriageway, no problem, but you're not allowed to go on a motorway. And I think a lot of the times where people get confused with them is because they do look very similar. You'll find that motorways, their signs are generally blue, where dual carriageways, a lot of them are green. And the biggest thing to look for when you're going to go somewhere, if you know you're not allowed to go onto a motorway, is a motorway will always have M in the road's name, like M9, M1, Motorway 1, Motorway 9. You'll even get some things like, I think the A1 has a part of a motorway, it's like A1 and then M in brackets, if I can remember correctly. And then the rest of it is pretty similar. You can do pretty much the same thing on each of them. You know, dual carriageways, you can travel up to 70 on certain dual carriageways. Motorways, you can travel 70 miles an hour. Some motorways have 2 lanes, 3 lanes more, and dual carriageways can have 1 lane, 2 lane and 3 lanes. So I mean, there's similarities but differences. Like I said at the start of the video, I'm not going to go too heavy on the motorway theory, because a lot of that you're going to be doing it in your theory test. You might go over it in your Mod 2 stuff. Obviously you can't go on the motorway, but you might talk about motorway and motorway rules, all that sort of stuff. So that's really the main differences between a motorway and a dual carriageway. They're pretty similar. Motorways have hard shoulders. That is one telltale sign as well. You know, dual carriageways don't have hard shoulders. Not every motorway has a hard shoulder, obviously, but a lot of them do, and then a lot of the hard shoulders will disappear for a while, you know, because of junctions, roadworks, all that sort of stuff. So it's worth just kind of learning about hard shoulders, what they are, how you're supposed to use them, all that sort of stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a wee chat first. I like to talk about this stuff first and then put it into practical use. I think it's easier to explain it and then explain it while I'm doing it, so you kind of hear it twice, if not more. I'm actually going to talk about these in a certain order, alright, because every rider has their own tips, their own kind of way they like to ride on motorways and stuff. So I've got about 5 or 6 tips that I think every rider should know. I mean, they're kind of like main tips. There are lots of other things you can learn about riding on a motorway. So the first one is check your bike. I mean, you should really be doing that anyway, and obviously the more you ride, the more you need to check and maintain it. But I mean, a good rule of thumb for me is I'll check it about once a week, just to make sure that everything's the way it's supposed to be. But if you check your bike before you go on a motorway, especially those longer journeys, because on a motorway you're going to be sitting almost straight roads most of the time, at up to about 70 miles an hour constantly. So you need to make sure that the bike's in good condition to do that. So obviously, you know, all the main things, tyres, chain tension, you know, steering, brake fluid, brakes, all that sort of stuff. Make sure that all that is in good condition before you set out. So my next tip is plan your route. If you're going to be going on a motorway, I mean, it depends how far you're travelling. Obviously, if you're commuting to work and you're only going to be on it for maybe half an hour or so, you know, that's different. You don't necessarily have to plan a route for that. But if you're planning on travelling for hours and hours on a motorway, or you know, right down to the other end of the country, it's a good idea just to get a route set out. You can get sat navs for bikes nowadays, but if you're not using a sat nav, even if you are, it's worth checking. And you want to check for things like roadworks, diversions, all that sort of stuff. If you have all that stuff set out, it's just going to make your life a bit easier. You know, there's nothing worse in travelling on a motorway for so many hours and you get caught because of roadworks or something like that. So if you can check beforehand and you can plan accordingly, and if there is any diversions, you can kind of go, right, I'll either take a note of that or we'll completely change the route or make our own diversion, you know, so you avoid tail ups and traffic and all that sort of stuff. So plan your route. So the next one is joining the motorway. How do you join a motorway? So you join it on what's called a slip road. Now these can be single lane or they can be double lane. You've just got to be wary of that, because some cars, as soon as they see there's more than one lane on the slip road, they'll just absolutely bomb past you. So the way to get onto the actual motorway is obviously mirror, mirror, signal. Just before you move onto the motorway, massive lifesaver. Alright, that's what you do when you're joining the motorway. But obviously before you join the motorway, you have to make sure that it's safe to do so. Now some drivers are more courteous than others. You also have to watch out for buses, trucks, all that sort of stuff. These big vehicles that are slightly slower moving, and it doesn't make sense for them to move over to the right hand lane. So what you'll find is when you're about to join and there's no gap for you to get in, the road user will move over to the right hand lane to create a space for you, or they'll just kind of slow down a wee bit and let you pull in front of them. Alright, which is absolutely fine. Whether you're pulling on to the motorway on an empty lane or a busy lane, whatever it is, when you get that chance to pull on, make sure that it's safe to do so, and make sure that you're doing it safely. Alright, because like we've said before, not everybody sees bikes. So I mean, it's nice and simple getting onto a motorway. Once you've done it a few times, it's no different from any other aspect of riding. You know, just make sure that when you're coming down the slip road, you're matching the speed of the traffic, so it's easier just to slip in. That's why it's called a slip road. And make sure you're doing your mirror, mirror, nice early indicator so everybody knows what your intention is. Big lifesaver before you move into your gap. Once you're on the left hand lane, cancel your signal. How do you get off a motorway? It's the exact opposite. Alright, so you would see the sign, say this sign says, you know, junction 1 a mile away, whatever. Let's just say we're coming off at junction 1. I mean, it's entirely up to you how you want to go about that. You can try and save a few seconds and pass people, or you can just stay in the left hand lane. By staying in the left hand lane though, what you're doing is you're giving yourself more than enough time to prepare. So you know that your junction is coming up at a mile away, you're staying in the left hand lane, you don't have to do anything. And then you'll get your markers, your 300 yard markers, 300, 200, 100, and then that's leading you up to your exit. Mirror, mirror, indicator. And then just before you go onto your slip road, you do a left lifesaver anyway. You know, it's good habit, just to make sure there's not another biker sitting behind you, there's not a vehicle right up your butt. And then once you're onto the exit, it's just like any other part of riding. You would then go back to navigating your way about whatever road you're on, whether it's taking you to a roundabout, whether it's taking you onto another motorway. So getting on is definitely the harder of the two, but once you kind of get used to it, it's absolutely fine. So like any road you're on, like anything you're doing on a bike, it always works in your favour to make yourself as visible as possible, because obviously on a motorway you're legally allowed to travel up to 70 miles an hour. We all know that not every road user does that, and that is just something that you have to deal with on the motorway, and it's just something you should be aware of. Wear a white helmet, you could wear a high vis vest, you could wear, you know, a different coloured riding jacket, it really doesn't matter. But whatever it is you're doing, if it increases your visibility a wee bit more, you're only doing yourself a favour. Now obviously most modern bikes, their front side lights will be on most of the time, you know, mine's just always on. But if you've got a slightly older bike that doesn't have that, that does have a side light setting, I don't know about that, so I'm not too sure. You know, just switch on your side lights when you're on a motorway. Obviously it's not for people travelling the opposite direction, it's for people looking in their mirrors. So if you do plan to do an overtake or whatever it is, you know, they're aware that you're there. So by having that light in their mirror, they go, oh wait a minute, there's something going up behind me, oh it's a bike. So by increasing how visible you are, especially on that motorway, it is an absolute must in my opinion. So my next tip is actually something which it's harder than it sounds, and it's concentration. I mean, it's fine when you're on twisty roads because you're constantly looking for limit points, you're constantly surveying whatever it is you're on, and you're constantly looking at the road condition, all this sort of stuff. When you're on a motorway, most of the time it's going to be a long, boring road. Alright, there's not going to be too much to do, there's not a lot to look at apart from the hills or the trees or the farms either side of you. So sometimes what you'll find is it's a bit harder to keep that concentration up, and obviously, like we said, you're travelling on faster roads with faster moving cars and stuff that's round about you, so the risks are bigger. If for any reason you feel that you're starting to lose concentration, you're getting a wee bit tired, you're just getting a bit grumpy, you know, you've been sitting on the bike for so many hours and the scenery's not changing, the roads aren't changing, you've still got many miles to do, pull into the next services, grab yourself a coffee, have a wee walk about for half an hour, you know, try and get some feeling back in your legs. And then once you feel kind of refueled and ready to go, you can head back out on the bike, back onto the motorway. And obviously, if that happens again, just pull over. There's no much point trying to gain a little bit of time by going, oh, if I stay out, I'll gain half an hour and you'll be there half an hour early. Yeah, that's probably not the best way to look at it. You know, you want to be looking at it as, I'm tired, my concentration's down, the last thing I want is to make a mistake. You know, so I'm going to pull over and have a wee rest. Always treat it like that, and that goes for any aspect of riding, whether you're on a motorway, dual carriageway, twisty roads, whatever. If you're feeling it, pull over, you know, have a wee break. It can be quite tough, and also just the tolerance, you know, building up that tolerance, getting your muscles used to being in that same position for hours and hours and hours on end. It can be really taxing, you know, so building up that tolerance so you can ride just a bit longer each time you go out. But you know, go out for an hour, then 2 hours, 3 hours, see how you feel. If 3 hours is your limit, ride about for 3 hours for a few weeks, and eventually your body will be used to being on the bike for longer periods of time. Obviously there's going to be a point when your body's going to say, look, I need to tap out, mate. I need some caffeine, I need to refuel, I need to rehydrate, because obviously dehydration is a big no-no when you're riding a bike. If you're dehydrated, your concentration is going to be seriously affected. It's just really hard to concentrate, really hard to do stuff. So obviously, have a wee break, hydrate, fuel up, caffeine, whatever it is, just take a wee break. So as well as concentrating, you need to think about distance, alright? We spoke about distance before, you know, when you're following a car, how kind of far do you need to be back. You know, the 2 second rule is pretty adequate, well, on a dry day I mean, you know, if it's wet then you want to at least double that, if not more. Yeah, make sure that the distance between the vehicle in front is a good distance. You know, I'd probably do 2 or 3 seconds, if not more, just purely because you're travelling at 70, and just for any reason, if the car in front of you hammers on the brakes, if, like we said, your concentration blips for a split second, you know, that can make all the difference between you stopping the bike in time or not. So making sure that you've got a nice big gap between the vehicle in front, and then if for any reason the gap that you've made, another road user pulls into it, they pass you and pull into it, just slow down a wee bit, create another gap. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is lanes. Alright, there's a simple rule when it comes to riding on a motorway, is the left hand lane is pretty much where you should be all the time, and the right hand lane is for overtaking. So if you need to overtake, you'd overtake. Once you'd finished to overtake, you'd pull back in. Now overtaking is exactly the same on a motorway as what it is on the roads. Alright, all the checks are the same, mirror signal, but before you pull out, because potentially there's going to be some road user flying up behind you at the speed of bloody light, make sure that lifesaver is massive. Alright, make sure that lifesaver is absolutely massive. And the same when you pull back in, just make sure that you do a big lifesaver, just to make sure that you're past the front of the car or whatever it is you're passing, because we don't have a rear view mirror, we can't tell, we can only go by our mirrors at the side. So sometimes you will get people who are really courteous. What they'll do is when you pass them, they'll give you a wee flash just to say, you're good to go mate, pull back in. Whether they flash you or not, do the lifesaver first. Right, so we're going to head down onto the stretch of motorway, and we'll go over, you know, the join in, the exit in, what you should do on the motorway, all this sort of stuff. So we're passing the last exit before ours, indicating lifesaver onto the motorway. Now this one's actually a double slip road, kind of. This is a slip road going onto this piece of motorway, and then this piece of motorway actually leads on to the other piece. So remember earlier on we were talking about some slip roads can have multiple lanes. So we're coming down the slip roads. You're trying your best to match the traffic. Mirror, mirror, indicator. Right, lifesaver. There we go, good biker there. Big ass lifesaver from that dude. Well done. Brownie points for you. As for position, I'm just staying in position 2. You don't really need to move about positions on the motorway. Maybe if you're going to overtake, especially a big lorry, you'd want to get over to the right a bit so they can see you. Because remember, if you can't see their mirrors, they can't see you. So just remember that, especially with buses and lorries. Alright, so we're on the motorway. You can travel up to 70. It's absolutely fine. Generally I sit about 60, 65. You know, purely because it can be a wee bit windy sometimes. You know, especially going over a bridge or stuff. So you can travel up to 70. That's absolutely fine. If we're going to overtake, mirror, mirror, indicator, big lifesaver, pull out, cancel your indicator. What we can do is we can pull back in. I'm just going to show you. Pull back in. It's exactly the same. Cancel your indicator. So everything's exactly the same, except the only thing you're doing is you're going in a different direction. So it's mirror, mirror, indicator, lifesaver, pull out. The reason I've done an extra lifesaver there, because I just caught a glimpse of a car in my mirror, which I didn't see the first time I checked my mirrors, so I just had done another wee check. Right, so we're actually going to be coming off at this junction here, junction 19. What I'm doing is I'm just staying back from the car in front. I'm checking my mirrors. I'm keeping a nice big gap. Away off in the distance you can see my junction markers, you know, 300, 200, 100, then we're on to the exit. Normally when I get to about 200 I'll start indicating, give everybody a nice big indication of what I'm doing. So I'm still checking my mirrors just to make sure there's nothing that I haven't seen. Wee lifesaver just before we pull on. Once we pull on, cancel our indicator. Now I know for a fact we're going to have to go right round the roundabout here, so mirror, mirror, signal, big lifesaver. I'm going to move over to the right hand lane because I know we're going round to the right and coming back on to this motorway. So we're going to rejoin the motorway, big lifesaver, cancel our signal. So even though there's no road markings here, this is clearly a 2-lane slip road, so I'm just going to take my time coming around here. What I'm doing just now is I'm just having a wee look at the road just to see what's coming along. I can see there's a lot of lorries and stuff there, so I'm going to get checking my mirror just now. So obviously you need to wait until you're past the point. Big lifesaver, we're nice and clear on, cancel our signal. Now I'm actually going to overtake this chap. Another big lifesaver. So when you're sitting on the motorway, we were talking about concentration. The one thing you have to remember about concentration when you're on a motorway is you need to make sure that you're observing everything. It's something that I talk about a lot, and because personally for me I think that observing everything is one of the key factors in staying as safe as possible on any road. Whether it be B roads, whether it be A roads, whether it be motorways, dual carriageways, doesn't matter what it is, observations are absolutely key. Oh my god, dude, are you really going to pull out? I'm not going to risk passing a lorry. So if you see something like that, let a lorry pull out, do not try and pass him before he pulls out. That is just silly. Alright, I know it's going to hinder your journey by about a minute or two, but it doesn't really matter. So yeah, so observe absolutely everything. Alright, so by observing everything you're giving yourself more time, because remember, higher the speed, the more time it is to react. And we got another friendly wee wave from the lorry driver. Oh, a nice man. Overtaking all these cars. 2/3 of a mile to my exit. I'm going to pull in nice and early. So one thing to remember when on a motorway is it's going to be windy. Alright, now obviously different bikes react differently to the wind. Depends on how big your windscreen is. Naked bikes obviously get more because of there's no protection. A lot of tourer bikes who have the big tall windscreens, you know, they're ideal for being on motorways. So it's just something to remember. Don't go into the motorway for your first time and absolutely crank it up. You know, just get used to the speed, get used to the feeling of the wind hitting you, and obviously get used to the feeling of passing lorries, other vehicles passing you, because you're going to feel a wee bit overwhelmed. You're suddenly this little vulnerable machine surrounded by vehicles passing you, and occasionally on both sides, because some people don't know how the rules of the road seem to work, but it does happen. So just by easing yourself into it, you know, if you've got a buddy, even if it's a mate in a car, you know, if you don't have someone who's got a bike, just say to them, hey, do you fancy follow me along the motorway? Or if you've got a mate who's got a bike, you fancy going for a run? You know, just practice something like that, going along the motorway for maybe 2 or 3 miles, pulling off, turning around, coming back, and just getting used to it. And then once you build up that skill level, that confidence, you can travel for longer on the motorways, you can travel on bigger motorways with more lanes, all this sort of stuff, and eventually you'll be treating motorways just like you do any road. It'll just become a part of riding. There are more in-depth theory things that you need to think about when riding on a motorway, things like smart motorways, you know, like all these SOS phones, all this sort of thing, you know, if you break down, you know, I'm going to leave that up to yourself, the rider, to learn that stuff, because it's better if you learn it while you're doing your theory. It helps you remember it a bit more, you know. But this was just more a kind of practical kind of side of it. So get onto a motorway somewhere close by, have a wee practice, see how you feel. It might not be for you, you know, that's absolutely fine. I know car drivers that don't go on motorways, I generally do, and they just don't like it. They don't like the feeling of other cars whizzing past them, all this sort of stuff, and that's understandable. Well, I'm hoping the camera angle's okay. If you let me know in the comments below if the camera needs adjusted any, or if you think it looks fine where it is, because I liked it where it was with my old helmet, so I'm just going to try to match it. This helmet's shaped slightly differently, so I need to kind of adjust things a bit more. But anyway dudes, my next video is coming up, and I've actually been asked quite a lot about this topic. I just wanted to put this at the end of this video just to let people know. The next video is going to be on filtering, and I'm going to be absolutely honest with you just now. I'm going to do a video and it's going to be a discussion on filtering. It's not going to be a tutorial, it's going to be a discussion. I'm not going to show you how to filter. I'm going to show you some of the things that you need to do and enable to filter, and we'll go over some of the highway code things, but I'm not physically going to show you how to filter. And the reason being is, I've always said I'm not an instructor, and I would never show you something that can potentially put you in danger. Alright, so we've done that with the braking. You know, I had a few people ask me about trail braking, and I was like, you know, I'm not going to show you how to do that because I don't do it. And if I showed you how to do that and something went wrong, I wouldn't like to have that on my conscience, you know. So it's exactly the same with the filtering video. We're going to have a discussion on it and talk about what it is it legal, you know, all this sort of stuff, and we'll just go over some of the do's and don'ts about it, and then I'll leave it up to the rider. If you decide that you want to filter, that's entirely up to you. So it's going to be a discussion and not a tutorial. But anyway, that's coming up probably next week sometime. This video is actually late going up. I had a few issues with my camera, so it's going to be next week's video is going to be a bit late as well. I'm kind of trying my best to get videos up every Monday. It's good to have a schedule, isn't it? Good to have a set date and time, but it doesn't always go to plan, you know, life gets in the way, so we'll try our best to keep it to Mondays. If not, it'll just be randomly throughout the week. But anyway, that's the next video is going to be on filtering. But hopefully you've enjoyed this video, guys. If you have, give it the thumbs up. I really do appreciate every single one of your likes, and of course, if you want to see all of my uploads, click on that subscribe button and ring the bell while you're there. That way you'll get notified every time I upload a video. But until next time dudes, stay safe, ride safe, take it easy.